Tonight, you will climb into bed. You will scroll for a few minutes. You will close your eyes, fall into one long, unbroken block of sleep, and wake up 8 hours later, assuming that this is simply how sleep works. It isn't. It never was. For most of human history, the night looked nothing like this, and the way you sleep right now might be the strangest sleep pattern your species has ever tried. Here's what actually happened when the sun went down. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans didn't have a switch to flip. When darkness fell, it fell completely. No streetlights, no screens, no hum of a refrigerator in the next room. Just black total darkness for 10, 12, sometimes 14 hours a night, depending on the season. That's an enormous stretch of time. What were your ancestors doing with all of it? You might assume the answer is simple. They slept because there was nothing else to do in the dark and daylight was too precious to waste lying down. That assumption feels obvious. It also happens to be wrong. And the evidence for how wrong it is comes from a place you wouldn't expect. Old court transcripts, medical journals, and a sleep lab that tried to strip modern light out of the human body entirely. The historian Roger Ekirch spent over a decade trying to answer that exact question. He combed through court records, diaries, and medical texts from pre-industrial Europe, and he found something odd. People kept referring to two different sleeps in a single night. A first sleep, a second sleep, and in between them, a quiet stretch of wakefulness that lasted anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours. People called this in-between period watching. What did they do during it? Nearly everything. They prayed, they talked with a spouse in bed, they tended a dying fire. Some visited neighbors, some had sex, and physicians of the time even recommended this hour for conception, believing it produced calmer children. It wasn't insomnia. It was routine. It was expected. Waking up in the middle of the night wasn't a malfunction. It was simply the second act of the night. Ekirch found this pattern referenced so casually in so many unrelated documents that it clearly wasn't a rare habit. It was assumed knowledge, the same way you'd casually mention lunch without explaining what lunch is. A play might have a character remark on something that happened in his first sleep. A medical guide might advise a treatment be taken between the sleeps. Nobody bothered to explain the concept because everyone already understood it. Then, within about a generation of gaslighting and later electric lighting spreading through cities, the references simply stopped. An entire nightly ritual, practiced for centuries, vanished from the written record almost as fast as artificial light appeared in homes. That alone should make you pause. But it gets stranger. In the 1990s, a psychiatrist named Thomas Weir decided to test whether this pattern was cultural or biological. He took a group of volunteers and put them in a room with 14 hours of darkness every night. No artificial light allowed, for weeks at a time. This mimicked the length of a winter night before electricity existed. Within about a month, something remarkable happened. The volunteers' sleep split on its own. They fell into two distinct blocks, separated by 1 to 3 hours of quiet, calm wakefulness in the middle of the night. Nobody told them to do this. Their bodies did it automatically, the moment artificial light was removed from the equation. Weir measured hormone levels during that quiet waking window and found something else unexpected. Prolactin, a hormone associated with calm and contentment, rose during the wakeful gap and stayed elevated, similar to the relaxed state seen in some animals resting between periods of activity. The volunteers described the middle of the night wakefulness not as frustrating, but as peaceful, almost meditative, closer to a light dose than a jolt to full alertness. So this wasn't just a quirk of pre-modern culture. It was underneath the culture the whole time. Segmented sleep may be the default setting for a human body, left alone in true darkness. Light bulbs didn't just let you stay up later. They erased an entire phase of the human night that your biology still remembers, even if your calendar doesn't. Now here's the part that reframes everything else about what night meant to your ancestors. It wasn't just about sleep. It was about connection. An anthropologist named Polly Wisner spent years living with and studying the Zhuhuanzi, a hunter-gatherer community in the Kalahari Desert whose way of life offers a window into much older patterns of human behavior. She recorded hundreds of hours of daytime conversation and compared it to conversation that happened at night around the fire. The difference was stark. Daytime talk was practical. Complaints, economics, minor disputes, coordination of tasks. Nighttime talk, once the fire was lit and the work was done, transformed into something else entirely. Storytelling, myth, humor, songs, information about distant relatives and social ties stretching far beyond the immediate camp. Why would the same group of people talk so differently depending on the position of the sun? Because night removed the pressure of the day. There was nothing left to build, hunt, or gather. Firelight created a small circle of visibility in an ocean of darkness, and inside that circle, people had nothing to do but face each other. No screens to look at instead, no tasks pulling attention elsewhere. Just faces, voices, and flickering light. Wisner's data, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, suggested that this nightly ritual wasn't a minor pastime. It was one of the primary ways culture, cooperation, and shared identity were transmitted from one generation to the next. The myths that explained where people came from. The songs that carried history before writing existed. The social bonds that meant help would arrive in a crisis. Much of it was built after dark, by firelight, night after night, for tens of thousands of years. Darkness, in other words, wasn't empty time. It was some of the richest time your ancestors had. But it wasn't only rich, it was also dangerous. And that danger shaped the ritual just as much as the storytelling did. Beyond the edge of firelight, in the real darkness where human eyes are nearly useless, predators could see far better than any person could. A rustle in the grass carried weight that it doesn't carry for you today. So the fire wasn't just a source of warmth or light for conversation. It was a boundary. Everyone inside the circle was safe. Everyone in the story being told was, for a moment, somewhere else entirely, somewhere the teller had chosen to take them. That tension between real vulnerability just past the light and total psychological safety within it may explain why nighttime storytelling felt so different from anything told in daylight. The stakes of being outside the circle were real. The comfort of being inside it was earned. That's likely one reason a fear of the dark shows up in humans almost universally, across cultures that never had contact with one another. It isn't a modern anxiety invented by horror movies. It's an old, practical caution, inherited from a very long stretch of time when the wrong kind of darkness could genuinely get you killed. Children still develop this fear on a predictable schedule, usually between the ages of 2 and 4, right around the age a young child in an ancestral environment would have been mobile enough to wander from the fire, but not yet strong enough to defend themselves. The fear didn't disappear when the streetlights went up. It just lost its original target. Think about what all of this means. The hours you now spend Passively staring at a phone were once the hours your species used to raise its children on shared myth, repair its social fabric, and pass down everything it knew, all while a very real boundary of firelight kept the actual dangers of night at bay. Night wasn't dead space between productive days. For most of human history, night was where meaning got made, and where safety had to be actively maintained rather than assumed. And that quiet waking period in the middle of it, the one Eckhart found in old diaries and where, recreated in his lab, may have served its own purpose too. Some researchers who study this pattern believe that period of calm wakefulness produced a distinct mental state, somewhere between dreaming and full alertness, that made it easier to process emotion, reflect, or simply be still. Not everyone agrees on exactly what it did, but the fact that it existed reliably across cultures and centuries before anyone eliminated it suggests it wasn't a defect to be fixed. Which brings you back to your own bed at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling. If you've ever woken up in the dead of night for no clear reason, unable to fall back asleep for an hour, and immediately assumed something was wrong with you, consider a different possibility. Your body might not be malfunctioning. It might be doing exactly what it evolved to do, in a world that no longer gives it permission to do it. You panic about the wakefulness because you've been told sleep should be one unbroken block. Your ancestors would have simply gotten up, tended the fire, and waited for the second sleep to come. The artificial light you flipped on tonight didn't just extend your day. It collapsed a second phase of your night into non-existence, and it replaced the fire-lit circle of faces with a glowing rectangle held 18 inches from your face. You still get light after dark. You still get stories after dark, in a sense, scrolled instead of spoken. But the essential ingredients Wiesner identified around that Kalahari fire, uninterrupted attention, shared presence, no competing task pulling your eyes away, have quietly disappeared from most modern nights. Notice, too, what replaced the boundary the fire used to provide. You no longer fear the dark past the edge of a campsite, because there usually isn't one. Instead, that same old vigilance seems to have found new things to fasten onto. An unread message, a noise in an unfamiliar house, a scroll through the news at midnight that leaves your chest tight for reasons you can't quite name. The circuitry built to watch for danger at the edge of firelight didn't retire when the danger changed. It simply went, looking for a new edge to watch. That's worth sitting with for a moment, not as a call to abandon your lamp or your phone, just as a question worth asking yourself the next time the sun goes down. What is the darkness actually for, now that you've filled it with light, and who is sitting inside your circle with you when it falls? Because for most of the time humans have existed, the night wasn't something to get through as fast as possible. It wasn't dead time before the next productive day. It was where the stories got told, where the bonds got made, where the mind, freed from the day's tasks, was finally allowed to wander, or wake, or simply sit still in the glow of a fire that no longer needs to exist for you to feel its absence. Tonight, you will climb into bed. You will scroll for a few minutes. You will close your eyes, and somewhere underneath the routine, a much older rhythm will still be waiting for a version of the night it hasn't seen in generations.